you ever felt on a silent night, while looking up at a sky thick with stars, not a sense of wonder but a chill down your spine? A sudden, paralyzing vertigo, as if the ground beneath your feet were just a thin crust of ice over a dark, infinite and frozen ocean. And what if that feeling wasn't just a fleeting fear, a mere whim of your imagination, but a glimpse into the most fundamental truth of our existence? What if the universe, in its indifferent majesty, couldn't care less about you, your dreams, your fears, your gods and your laws? And what if the very reality you take for granted, the solidity of the world and the coherence of your own mind, were a sick joke, a fragile anomaly on the verge of shattering at any moment? Welcome. You are not just feeling afraid. You have just opened the door to metaphysical horror. And I must warn you, after you cross this threshold, it is impossible to see the world and yourself in the same way ever again. Let's get straight to the point. Without the pleasantries and euphemisms our culture insists on using to shield us from reality. The horror that most people know and consume is a retail horror, a shelf-ready product. It's the fear of the monster in the closet, the killer with a knife, the ghost in the hallway, the shambling zombie. It is a fear that, paradoxically, is designed to be comforting. Yes, you read that right. Comforting. Why? Because it operates within a system of rules that we understand. It presupposes the existence of an order, a normality. There is a safe world with its physical and moral laws, and the monster is the exception, the anomaly that temporarily invades this normality. The hero's goal and our own cathartic relief as spectators is to defeat the monster and restore order. The killer is caught. The vampire gets a stake through the heart. The ghost is exorcised and we can go back to sleeping peacefully, reinforced in our belief that good triumphs over evil and that the universe deep down makes sense. This horror plays with our adrenaline, gives us a controlled scare, but it doesn't shake the foundations of our sanity. It frightens us, but ultimately it reaffirms us. Metaphysical horror is of another breed. It is wholesale horror, horror in its purest and most corrosive form. It isn't interested in monsters that break the rules of our world. It is interested in the terrifying possibility that there are no rules, or worse, that the real rules are so alien and hostile to our minds that their mere contemplation would drive us mad. The target of metaphysical horror is not your body, but your worldview. It doesn't want to give you a jump scare. It wants to commit an act of philosophical terrorism against your perception of reality. It seeks to demonstrate, in a visceral and inescapable way, that your sense of identity, your belief in progress, your faith in a purpose and your trust in logic are a sham, a convenient illusion our species developed to keep from going insane in the face of the meaningless and silent vastness of the cosmos. The true monster here is not a creature with tentacles or fangs. The true monster is the very fabric of existence. It is the discovery that the laws governing the universe are, at best, absolutely indifferent to our existence, and at worst, actively hostile to it. The undisputed godfather of this kind of dread, the architect of nightmares who mapped this bleak territory, is without a doubt the writer from Providence, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. To understand what he did, we need to demystify the popular image of him. Lovecraft is often remembered as a creator of bizarre monsters with unpronounceable names like Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, and Azathoth. And yes, he did that. But the tentacles, the sunken cities, and the degenerate cults were just the bait, the grotesque visible tip of a philosophical iceberg of horror. The real terror in Lovecraft is not the monster. It is what the monster's existence implies for us. It is the philosophy that permeates all his stories, a worldview he himself christened cosmicism, or cosmic indifferentism. What does cosmicism say in plain English? It posits that humanity is cosmic dust, an ephemeral and insignificant biochemical accident in a universe so vast, ancient and devoid of purpose that our minds are incapable of conceiving it. Our religions, our morals, our sciences, our greatest artistic achievements and our deepest dramas are, from the cosmos's point of view, less relevant than the mold growing on a forgotten slice of bread in the back of a cupboard. The great turning point of Western thought, which placed man at the center of creation, is seen by Lovecraft as the most arrogant and pathetic of illusions. We are the center of nothing. We are a fleeting anomaly in a forgotten corner of the cosmic stage, living out our little drama on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. And, what's worse, we are not alone. There are other things out there. Entities, forces, intelligences so ancient and powerful that our existence is, to them, completely irrelevant. They are not evil in our petty human sense of the term. Evil, as we understand it, presupposes intent, a relationship, a shared morality. An avalanche that buries a ski village is not evil. It is just an avalanche following the laws of physics. Likewise, Lovecraft's great old ones don't want to destroy us out of hatred or malice. They would destroy us or enslave us or ignore us, in the same way we might step on an anthill without even noticing it was there. Our insignificance is so absolute that we don't even merit their hostility. It is at this precise point that horror becomes metaphysical. The terrifying discovery that drives Lovecraft's protagonists to madness or death is not simply that a monster exists. It is the discovery that the universe they knew, the universe explained by science and blessed by religion, was a comforting lie. Human science, which prides itself on mapping and explaining the world, reveals itself to be a collection of kindergarten rules that only apply within our tiny, sheltered bubble of reality. When a Lovecraftian character encounters one of these beings or glimpses the non-Euclidean geometry of an alien city, what breaks is not just his courage, but his very ability to process reality. Reality reveals itself as something fundamentally alien, inhuman, incomprehensible. Madness in Lovecraft's stories is not a mental illness. It is an epistemological consequence. It is the inevitable result of a human brain, an organ evolved to find patterns, causes, and purposes, being forced to confront a universe that is the very embodiment of chaos, randomness, and meaninglessness. The ultimate terror is not dying. It is realizing that your life, your mind, your emotions, and your entire species never mattered in the slightest. And that sanity depends entirely on not knowing this. This feeling of cosmic insignificance is one of the pillars of metaphysical horror. But it is not the only. There is another pillar, perhaps even more intimate and disturbing, a horror that emerges not from the vastness of the universe out there, but from the claustrophobia of our own consciousness in here. And to explore this inner abyss, we need to talk about one of Lovecraft's darkest and most brilliant heirs, the American writer Thomas Ligotti. If Lovecraft showed us that the universe is a horrible and indifferent place, Ligotti whispers in our ear that the real horror is the simple fact of being conscious within that universe. Ligotti elevates philosophical pessimism to a level of macabre art that few have dared to reach. He draws directly from the well of thinkers like the German Arthur Schopenhauer, and even more explicitly, from the Norwegian philosopher Peter Wessel Zapffe, to construct a worldview where human consciousness is not an evolutionary gift, but a tragic curse. Zapfe's thesis, which Ligotti transforms into the stuff of literary nightmares, is brutally simple and devastating. At some point in our evolutionary journey, nature, in its blind and indifferent process, made a grave mistake. It gave one species, Homo sapiens, an excess of consciousness, a hypertrophied intellect. We became the only animal fully aware of its own mortality. We are beings whose intelligence allows us to comprehend the fundamental absurdity of our situation. We are puppets of flesh, governed by biological imperatives for survival and reproduction, yet equipped with a mind that yearns for a meaning, a justice, and a purpose that the universe simply does not offer. We are, in Zapfe's words, a living paradox, a freak of nature. And this awareness of our precarious condition causes us unbearable existential suffering, a primordial panic that must be constantly repressed for us to continue functioning and participating in the theater of everyday life. How do we do this? Zapffe identifies four main mechanisms that humanity has developed to distract itself from this terrible truth. The first is isolation, which consists of simply not talking or thinking about the subject, of creating a social consensus to sweep death, disease, old age, and absurdity under the rug. The second is anchoring, a mechanism by which we fix our attention on solid artificial values that give us a sense of stability and purpose. God, country, family, career, a favorite sports team, political ideology. We create these pillars to give ourselves the illusion that life has a secure foundation and that we are not floating in the void. The third is distraction, perhaps the most widely used in modernity, drowning ourselves in a torrent of entertainment, work, consumption, hobbies, anything to keep our minds occupied and away from the big, uncomfortable existential questions. And the fourth is sublimation, the process by which some of us transform pain and anguish into art, literature, philosophy, a way of looking into the abyss, but through the aesthetic filter of a creative work, which makes it somehow bearable and even beautiful. The horror in Thomas Ligotti's tales occurs precisely when these psychic defense mechanisms fail. His stories are populated by apathetic, alienated, depressive characters who for some reason can no longer sustain the charade of normality. They see the world as it really is, a grotesque puppet theater, a meaningless meat grinder, a conspiracy against the human race orchestrated by existence itself. In Ligotti, there are no external monsters coming from space. The monsters are the very gears of reality, the rot inherent in being. Reality is a nightmare from which one cannot awaken, and consciousness is the torture chamber, where we are forced to watch this nightmare in the first person. In his non-fiction work, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, he argues openly that the best thing we could do as a species is to stop reproducing. A radical antinatalism as the only ethical and compassionate response to an existence that is, at its core, suffering. Metaphysical horror in this vein is the chilling realization that there is nothing wrong with you for feeling displaced, anxious, or depressed. On the contrary, what is wrong is the very fact of existing. It is the paralyzing suspicion that sanity is not having a clear view of reality, but rather being exceptionally good at deceiving yourself. The normal, functional, and happy person is the one whose repressive mechanisms are firing on all cylinders. The madman, the depressive, the weirdo is the one who, through some crack in their psychic armor, has begun to glimpse the truth behind the veil. And the truth is that we are sentient puppets dancing to a dissonant cosmic melody, and worst of all, we are aware of it. This idea that reality itself is flawed, corrupt, or fundamentally malign leads us to a third territory of metaphysical horror, which we could call Gnostic or ontological horror. Gnosticism was a fascinating set of philosophical religious beliefs from the first centuries of the Christian era that, in a nutshell, advocated a radically different cosmology. For the Gnostics, our material world was not created by a good and omnipotent God, but by an inferior, ignorant, and often malevolent entity, the demiurge. The true God, the principle of good, dwells in a distant and perfect spiritual plane, and we are trapped in this prison reality, with our souls, which are sparks of the true divine, imprisoned in bodies of flesh and matter, subject to pain, decay, and death. Metaphysical horror often recreates this Gnostic intuition in a secular way, without the need for theology. The core idea is that the reality we perceive is not the true reality, or that it is a defective and hostile version of it. It could be a computer simulation, an increasingly popular idea, the fever dream of a mad entity, or simply a corrupted version of something that was meant to be different and better. The science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, though not strictly a horror author, was the absolute master of exploring this territory of ontological instability. In his works, reality is fluid and treacherous. Characters constantly doubt their own memories and identity, and the fabric of the real can tear at any moment, revealing something else, usually far more sinister and controlling, behind the facade. What is genuinely frightening here? It is the total loss of foundation, the collapse of our basic trust in what surrounds us. We depend on an implicit faith in the stability of reality just to function day to day. We trust that the chair we're sitting on won't turn to dust, that the laws of physics won't take a holiday, that the people we love are real and not holographic projections. Ontological horror attacks this fundamental trust. It suggests that all of this is a fragile construction, a cardboard set. What if your entire life is a lie? What if you are just a character in a nightmare and the real you is somewhere else screaming to wake up? This kind of horror needs no monsters or ghosts. The world itself becomes the monster. The feeling of familiarity, the comfort of home and routine, is revealed as the most dangerous and suffocating of illusions. The terror is the suspicion that there is no ground beneath our feet, only an infinite abyss of possibilities, the vast majority of which are terrifying. This leads us to a crucial and, let's be honest, politically incorrect point in our era. The modern obsession with positivity, with wellness, with the culture of self-help and positive thinking, is, from the perspective of metaphysical horror, an extremely sophisticated and pervasive form of repression. It is Zapfi's anchoring mechanism, supercharged by late-stage capitalism. It is a desperate and unceasing attempt to build a sandcastle of meaning, happiness, and productivity against the inexorable tide of cosmic absurdity. And like all sandcastles, it is destined to be washed away by the next wave. Metaphysical horror, in this context, offers us a brutal, bitter, but perhaps necessary antidote to this overdose of forced and toxic optimism. It gives us permission to feel what we often feel in the silence of our minds, but are afraid to admit aloud: that things are, on a fundamental level, wrong. That suffering is not just an accident to be fixed with therapy or medication, but perhaps an inherent property of conscious existence. That the anxiety we feel is not just a chemical imbalance in our brain, but a perfectly rational and lucid response to an existential situation that is, in itself, irrational and terrifying. The contemporary philosopher Eugene Thacker, in his brilliant trilogy Horror of Philosophy, argues that philosophy and the horror genre have always been secret partners, walking hand in hand in the dark. Philosophy, at its core, is the courageous attempt to think the unthinkable, to push human thought to its absolute limits. Horror, in turn, does exactly the same thing, but not through logical arguments, but through emotion, affect, visceral fear. Both confront the limit of our knowledge and our ability to make sense of the world. Thacker coins the concept of the world without us, the world as it is in itself, stripped of our perception, our language, and our mental categories. And this world, he suggests, is fundamentally hostile or indifferent to thought. When we try to think it in its raw state, it returns our gaze with horror. So what is the point of dwelling on all this? If reality is a cosmic nightmare and consciousness is a curse, why not just give up, anesthetize ourselves with distractions, or worse? And here, against all odds, we arrive at the paradoxically motivational and profoundly liberating aspect of metaphysical horror. By forcing us to face the worst-case scenario, the total absence of meaning, our cosmic insignificance, the malevolent or indifferent nature of existence, it frees us from the unbearable burden of having to find a meaning that was never there to be found. If there is no cosmic plan, if there is no final judge watching us, if there is no greater purpose for our lives given to us in advance, then that means we are radically free. Free from the anxiety of having to fulfill our mission or find our purpose. Free to create our own values, even knowing they are fragile, contextual, and temporary. Free to find beauty in fleeting moments, to forge human connections, not because they are part of a divine design, but precisely because they are all we have to warm ourselves against the cold darkness of the universe. Courage, in this context, is not the absence of fear. Courage is looking directly into the abyss of absurdity, and despite it all, deciding to have a coffee with a friend, listen to a song that gives you goosebumps, write a poem, hug someone you love, or simply keep breathing. It is an act of existential rebellion, inspired by the purest spite. A futile rebellion against the universe, perhaps, but no less noble or meaningful for us. Metaphysical horror does not offer us salvation, redemption, or eternal happiness. It offers us something much rarer and more valuable: dignity. The dignity of not living like deluded children, waiting for a cosmic parent to come and solve our problems. It treats us like adults, as beings capable of facing the naked truth, no matter how terrible and desolate it may be. It tells us that life is not a fairy tale with a happy ending, but perhaps a cosmic horror story. And our role in this story is not necessarily to be the hero who survives until the end, but to be the witness who faces the monster, be it the indifference of the cosmos, the absurdity of consciousness, or the fragility of reality, with eyes wide open, without blinking. The experience of delving into metaphysical horror is like a purgation, a catharsis in reverse. It burns away the illusions, the childish hopes, the theological and ideological crutches we use to support ourselves. And what is left after the fire? What remains is the real in its terrible and fascinating nakedness. And incredibly, there is a strange, sober peace in that. The peace of no longer having to pretend, of no longer having to participate in the social game of upholding the lie of normality and mandatory positivity. It is the acceptance that we are strange, conscious and doomed creatures, living for a brief moment in an even stranger and more indifferent place. So the next time you feel that existential chill, that vertigo in the face of the infinite, don't try to repress it. Don't turn on the TV, don't check your social media. Stay with that feeling for a moment. Explore it. It is a portal. It is your own mind, in its most brutal honesty, inviting you to stop playing on the playground of consensual reality and to take a peek inside the haunted house that is existence itself. Is it frightening? Without a doubt. But it is also the beginning of true lucidity. And in a world increasingly built on comfortable lies and virtual realities, being a lucid pessimist is perhaps the only honest form of heroism we have left.